Well, as we have a few more people trickling in, I want to seize the opportunity to just do a quick plug for Global PDX. I think all of you here know about Global PDX. We're Oregon's hub for global change makers. We facilitate events like this, workshops, and networking opportunities so people who are changing the world have a chance to cross-pollinate their ideas with other people who are changing the world. And we believe that's going to elevate everybody's ability to make the impact that they want to see. So this event is a very exciting one for us. Hi, Kim. Thanks for joining. I see you're commuting. That's awesome. This one is particularly exciting as it directly ties to human rights. We are big on the Sustainable Development Goals and watching the trends that are coming around the world. So we're so excited to have Aaron here today. Before I pass the mic over, I would love to have each of us introduce ourselves. So what I'd love to see is for everyone to share their name, their organization or field of work. And then we also like to do an icebreaker where you share what kind of person you want to meet. So our philosophy behind this is that if we all say who we want to be connected with to a room of 8 people, we then can amplify that ability to connect by 8. So if you hear someone say, gosh, I just really want to meet someone who has been to India, and you know someone who's been to India, let's make that connection happen. And let's make this world a more connected place. So I'll go ahead and go first. My name is Jennifer Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based here in Portland, Oregon. I'm the initiative lead at Global PDX, and I also do consulting for mission-driven businesses to make them more effective. And the kind of people that I really want to meet are people who have gotten their master's degrees in peace building and conflict resolution. I'm in the process of applying, and no way, really? See how quickly this happens, you guys, when you share who you want to meet. I'm in the process of applying right now to some master's programs and just am very hungry to meet more of those kinds of people. I see I might already have a connection. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm just going to pass it around the room. If you're someone who hates sharing and you don't want to talk at all, that's totally fine. Just say pass or write me a note and I won't call on you. With that in mind, Dana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow, that really did happen very quickly.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Dana Ghazi or Dana Ghazi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a DEI trainer and consultant with Oregon Health and Science University. I actually work with Aaron on the same team. And we met during a conference. So yeah, these spaces is where the magic happens for sure. I did study conflict resolution peace studies from Portland State Universities. That's where I got my master's. I got to study in The Hague and go to Cyprus and work in Bosnia. So I'm interested right now in meeting people who have that kind of global vision and with really bringing like community feeling to global visions and with understanding global feminism and intersectionality and putting that kind of work at the forefront. So anyone who's like interested in these same topics, I would love to connect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today. Brad, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Ketch. I feel like I'm the only one on this call who doesn't know everybody. So I've been lurking for a while with Global PDX mailing list and definitely got a topic that is right dead center of our work, which is out in the east part of Multnomah County. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Community Development Corporation of Oregon, best known locally as Rockwood CDC. And the connection that's global is every single day because the Rockwood community has 90 languages spoken in a 2 square mile area. It's not just the most diverse location in Oregon, but it's one of the most diverse locations in the United States. So our own staff is 14 different cultures, and the world happens all around us every single day. And the kind of people that I like to meet are basically you guys.
Well, we are so glad to have you here, Brad. And I can already see so many ways in which Global PDX might be able to connect you with even more folks. So we're glad you're here. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Rashard? Rashard,
Yep.
please introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
Hi, I'm Rashard Baker. I'm a program manager at King County Department of Community and Human Services for programs that deal with economic development And I'm also a board member at Path with Art, which is a local arts organization providing art classes to low and no income adults. I most want to meet people who are passionate about changing the world, however that may be. Specific focus on economic equity and intersectional equities. That's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, feels like GlobalPDX is a great community for me to connect you with further after the call. So we're glad you're here. Hope, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I am currently a graduate candidate, University of Oregon, doing concurrent master degrees, one in nonprofit management and the other one in conflict resolution. And
Met
and
two people.
so I'm looking to meet more people in the industry too. I'll be graduating next year, so I don't really know what I want to do yet. I just know that I'm passionate about this and learning. And I'm about to go on an adventure this summer, and I'm looking for people who have a global vision also. I'm going to be spending the summer in Southeast Asia working with some NGOs there. So yeah, I'm glad that we're here, and I'm glad that I made it, and I'm excited for the class today.
It's wonderful to see you again, Hope. Thanks so much for joining us. Judy, how about yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Judy. I use she, her pronouns. Brad, I don't really know other people in the space either, so you're not alone there. But I do know Aaron,
Okay.
so that's I'm in a communications role with an international development in their organization, an NGO, in their water program. And I'm most interested right now connecting with folks who are really thinking a lot about how to like weave creativity and arts in their work more. And so Aaron knows this. I went to like a local like script table read over the weekend, and it was super fun. I read a few lines. I hadn't done that since like, high school, college. And so yeah, just interested in meeting people who are have the arts in their life.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to have you. Corey, I see you just joined. I won't make you talk if you don't want to, but we are going around sharing our name, our organization, and the kind of people that we like to meet if you want to hop on. As you're considering it, I'll introduce Kim because I know that Kim's in transit. Kim is one of our fantastic GlobalPDX advisory board members. Kim also shared their website in the chat. So if you want to explore a little bit more about how she works with B Corps and impact consultants, there's some information there for you. I'll also mention that if you're a GlobalPDX member, all of the LinkedIn profiles for everyone who's in this room will be shared in our private group. So you'll be able to connect very easily with them there. If you're not a member and you're interested, please let me know. We'd love to have all of you in our community. But you're also very welcome to not be a member and continue enjoying all of the work that we do. And with that, I'd love to pass it over to Aaron. Aaron, before you get started, what kind of people are you interested in meeting?
Thanks for asking. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Jennifer. My name's Aaron Pina. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, wearing my fun coral shirt today. I want to connect with folks who are heart-centered, service-oriented, and who want to apply human rights and equity in the community and not just learn about human rights and equity. So if that sounds good to y'all, like hit me up. I'll put here's my contact info in the chat. Oh, should I just go right into it?
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, take it away.
Let me share my screen here. You can give me a thumbs up if y'all can see my slides. Technology and I often do not get along.
Looks great.
Great. It's the hardest part of the presentation. So who am I and why am I here? I want to thank Jennifer and GlobalPDX for the invitation. Living in Portland, I sometimes feel disconnected from the rest of the country and global events, and organizations like GlobalPDX are just an amazing way for me to keep a toe in the international world and to learn from my colleagues and just to see what is going on in my city. So thank you, Jennifer, for your leadership and for inviting me here today. So I spent a career close to 20 years as an international educator and serving as a human rights officer in the U.S. Department of State. And I spent years living and serving overseas because I just couldn't really take doing this work in the U.S. at the time. Promoting equity in the U.S. as a mixed Black man was just too much for me. And so I faced the world with my service and with my skills, and a lot of my time was spent in Israel and Palestine, which I actually found a little easier in my heart to work with and serve more than addressing the U.S. I left government in 2012, ostensibly to start a family, and I came back to the States and looked around and was scared at what I saw. I was really scared and moved to bring my experiences back to the US and to come home and to bring this work home. And what I saw was this emerging pattern of diversity, equity, inclusion, which, I'm not a de&i worker, I'm a human rights guy. I'll talk more about the differences as we get into the talk. But I really was disappointed with how de&i was working in North America. So I decided to start my company and add my voice to the chorus. And so now I work as the founder and head culture broker for Anthropolicy. And we help organizations and lifestyle companies center human rights and equity or recenter human rights and equity during a high stakes transition. And so I work with individuals and families, local state governments, tech companies, arts organizations who are looking to really apply this work to transform their culture. So that's a little bit about me. So I provide a leadership coaching on a wide array of issues related to human rights and equity. Increasingly, I've been working with governments to center equity and analyze and interpret their data sets. And today I'll focus a lot on business and nonprofits. And I work alongside businesses and nonprofits on strategically implementing human rights processes and practices to change behavior. I am in the behavior change business, not the performance compliance business. And towards the end of my talk, I'll raise some of these issues around performativeness versus culture change. So I really like driving questions and prompts to center these types of engagement. And so this is the driving question for this conversation. Can market-based approaches, or if you prefer capitalism, move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion? So this is a conversation. I have maybe 9 more slides. So I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint. I really want to have an engaging conversation. We're an intimate group. Please raise your hand, interrupt me. I'm from Providence, so I'm not going to think you're rude for interruption at all. I'm going to think you're enthusiastic. So please use your voice or drop questions and comments in the chat, and that way we can have a more lively engagement. So I'll cover 3 main elements today. I'll talk about how we can understand the global context for the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, and how the SEC became an address, a location for human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion for the US. We'll also learn how the SEC is aligning its views on equity with much of the global North, which has been doing this work for decades. The US is a little behind on these issues when it comes to linking economics and equity. And finally, we'll all start to appreciate, understand how the SEC's focus on human rights and equity impacts profit and nonprofit organizations. And we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of what I'm seeing out of the SEC. So I'll focus on the SEC, but I want to make a note that the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, has adopted all of the SEC's practices. So you're getting a twofer. You'll understand how the SEC views human rights equity and how the FTC views human rights and equity. So we'll understand, learn, and appreciate. So I want to take it back close to 25 years ago. In the early 2000s, then President George H.W. Bush started the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC. And the MCC had these very ambitious goals. The majority of those goals were around promoting equity, promoting human rights globally. Yet the Millennium Challenge goals were very America-centric and very heavily based on market-based solutions, divorced from equity. But it did get the ball rolling, and I want to acknowledge that the US did help move the UN to adopt a framework around business human rights and equity. So Jennifer mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. The UN around 2015 codified, I think there's 17, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, because I know you're an SDG.
You're absolutely right, 17.
There are 17 global sustainable development goals. I'm going to zero in on those goals and approaches that center human rights and equity. And those have to do with gender, class, race, quality of life. Healthcare access is another element of the SDGs. Anti-poverty work, which to me relates to human rights and equity. So right off the bat, I want you all to know that there are transversal, meaning they can be applied globally, and transcultural standards for human rights and DE&I. Many people are like, where are the standards? Here are the standards. And so for almost a decade, we have had a global consensus. 193 countries supported the SDGs, except for North Korea, Iran, and Sudan. So outside of those countries, every country has supported these priorities and these metrics. And so there is a codification there. There are standards that can help you as an individual, your organizations, nonprofits, and for-profits. That's some of the historical context from where the SEC started to get its lenses from. It's from the UN and these sustainable development goals. So within the sustainable development goals, within the UN system, they don't use the terms DE&I, which is very North American. Most countries around the world do not use DE&I. They don't use those words, diversity, equity, inclusion. Instead, the UN and much of the world's governments speak in terms of economics, society, and governance. Those are the three baskets that hold DE&I globally. And so this is the UN's approach to promoting sustainable human rights, promoting sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a bit of a code switch, it's a bit of a translation. And if it's helpful for you, whenever you hear ESG, think DE&I. And that raises an interesting issue about sort of the Western North American lens of DE&I that does not travel very well throughout the globe. It travels well in North America, but not globally. I see there's a hand. Hey, Brad, what you got?
Hey, Aaron. I mean, first of all, I'm fascinated with every word. I'm so glad I'm part of your presentation. I think of, and it sounds like I'm wrong, of DEI as a subset of ESG. You're suggesting that it's the same thing.
Yeah, this is my opinion. I think you'll find many folks who would agree with you, Brad, that DE&I, as North Americans conceive of it, is a subset. I view it in a much larger lens, that the entire ESG package is really about human rights and equity, whether it's environmental, business, individual, government to government, business to business. And the history of this work, even before the Millennium Challenge Corporation was started, is embedded and grown from the UN Human Rights Declaration. And if you look at the buckets, many of these buckets within ESG can be traced back to ground truth, human rights, and equity policies and practices.
Okay.
Great question. Rashar.
How does white supremacist ideology, as it relates to racial classification and, I guess, exploitation and colonization, fit into this piece?
Yeah, great question. You're kind of teasing out the end of this talk. It absolutely does. Whenever I see economic lenses that are proposing to solve inequity, I actually get a little concerned, and I actually see that as a very subtle, a very nuanced thing, but it's actually potentially replicating white supremacist outlooks and perceptions.
Right.
Right? Like Rashar and I were talking earlier this week, racism in North America is not an economic issue. I do not believe institutional racism can be solved through economic means. It might be part of the solution, but all too often it leads the way. And to me, that could replicate and exacerbate systemic oppression. So it absolutely is part of this conversation. And towards the end, when I give you sort of my take on what's going on, I think you'll see that I center some of these elements of systemic oppression that we want to be very mindful of.
Sorry to preempt.
No. That's great. That's priming.
Okay.
We're priming each other to understand that this isn't all hearts and flowers, and it sounds great, but is it actually an effective tool for moving the needle? That's why we're here. And majority culture, systemic oppression is going to push back against the notion that economics alone can solve it. Let's talk a little bit about the SEC. I am not an economist. I don't even play one on television. Me and numeracy don't get along very well. If y'all have more wisdom around the SEC, please leaven in the talk with your perspectives. So the SEC began around the Great Depression in the mid to late 30s. Their mission, and that's the first tick there, the mission is to protect investors, maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets that can facilitate capital formation. The SEC views de&i, or ESG, as an investor protection and risk mitigation strategy. So right there, to Rashar's point, there's already a challenge here, because the SEC understands these issues similarly to that of a lot of organizations, which sees a risk, and they want to mitigate against the risk. Now, my difference is not a risk to be mitigated against. Your gender is not a risk to be mitigated against. And so this gets to that actuarial insurance, HR, compliance model that certainly the global north has adopted. But potentially, it's okay if that is actually the motivation to protect investors and to maintain fair, orderly markets, and to see equity as a way to do that. The SEC is a powerful economic actor, not just in the US, but globally. So they oversee over $100 trillion in securities and trading in US markets annually. Over $115 trillion. So regardless of how we view the market, we cannot argue against the fact that the SEC is a prime mover of economic policy and all related policies, especially in countries such as ours that promote a capitalist individual take on life. And increasingly, SEC sees these issues as risk management. You can decide whether that's enough or not. Perhaps it is enough to view these policies and products as a hedge. Perhaps you think that is disingenuous. Donna, see there's a hand there.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I guess I'm trying to like think through, maybe you can give us an example of SEC's work in like maybe in a specifically in maybe this Western North America context versus not. Like, how does that, do you have a case study in mind? Do you have like maybe an incident where SEC was involved and during like a recent conflict or transition? Like, I'm just wondering if you can like give us like more concrete example about how that work, for example, translates really on the ground.
Oh, so like how does the SEC actually operate on the ground?
Yes.
Right. One of the things they do is monitor trading, right? They monitor the trading floor. They're looking for malfeasance. They're looking for fraud. They're looking for folks who are cheating the game. And we could argue that the game is already rigged, that they are viewed as a referee of sorts for Wall Street, NASDAQ. The SEC under President Biden has developed policies to support other countries' trading floors as well. So the SEC advises the Nikkei in Japan. They advise the German markets. The name escapes me. They have flirted with working with the Saudi Arabian governments, Qatar and UAE on markets. It's very politically tricky and risky to have a US economic organ connect with Middle East countries over markets, but they are actually doing that. Rashard?
Yeah, I just found it interesting, maybe anecdotal, but I worked on a trading floor of a major investment bank in the 90s, and I just found like the stark contrast of people of color on the trading floor, and hearing you say SEC drives DEI just to seem like so crazy, because it was one of the most racially charged environments I've ever worked in any place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. So I was just wondering, like, from a SEC, I mean, they can't necessarily, I think, affect all of the nuance that happens, but in terms of like driving change, is it mostly around how they manage the market in terms of how activity is done through trading and insider trading and that piece, or licensure, or is it more of an idea or ideal as opposed to a practical application?
Good question. I think it's a little in between an idea and executing with oversight. So this is very new, okay, for the SEC. It's not even 10 years old. It really picked up under President Biden. So it's very new. The codification, the metrics are not new, as I pointed out. The UN has developed those metrics for over 20 years. And those metrics, Rashar, what's really interesting is those metrics were actually developed by majority minority communities globally within the UN system. So the metrics actually have voice and choice. The SEC doesn't. It is overwhelmingly a majority culture, and by that, I mean cisgendered, male, over 40 or 50, okay? Like it or not. My view on systemic oppression is I cannot solve it as a mixed man of color. It is for the majority culture to square it away, not on me to necessarily fix it. So I have a slightly different view, and I'm like, great, the SEC can be viewed as a systemic agent of oppression. It could potentially be a change agent. And when majority culture, hyper affluent folks who happen to be white stand up and say, we need to provide oversight on DE&I, I think that resonates far more than a brown or black face saying it. It's unfortunate, it's sad, and it reflects systemic oppression, and I have found it to be true. So they are building the metrics increasingly since 2022. The SEC has taken it upon himself to include DE&I and ESG in their year-long assessments, which are called examination priorities. So it's a national priority for the SEC to learn how to codify equity into its oversight mechanisms. You see it in the environmental regulations and environmental practices that the SEC provides oversight on. So one of our participants today consults on B Corp. So B corporations is a great example of how markets can respond to equity, right? To become a B corporation, you have to really have your equity game aligned. Brad.
Aaron, I'm thinking perhaps my personal experience might provide some clarity. I used to be the CEO of a company that was publicly traded and therefore regulated by the SEC. And what's freaking out corporate America today is that the initial rules that the SEC is proposing, which I gave you a link, are very innocuous. They're very common sense. Who could complain? Yet corporate America is, because what they're actually concerned about is that it opens a door for the SEC to advance much further than the initial rules. The initial rules are simply climate change. Hey, if you're a corporation and there is any real risk that your earnings could be hurt by climate change, you need to disclose that. That's pretty much it. And who could argue? But the fear, I think completely wrongly feared, and I think it's racist at its core, is that once that's accepted as an expansion of the SEC's powers and duties, that any woke agenda, in their words, would be shoved through the same open door.
Right.
Therefore, it must be stopped at all costs now. And so that's how I understand the discussion, out in the broader world. And all it does to me is reinforce the historic. I mean, it's not even capitalism. It's dumb capitalism. It's raw dog, Wild West, libertarian, F everybody capitalism. And that's not what the majority of corporate leaders in this country actually want. I think, although people are grappling with this change, I think it's going to go through. I think reasonable CEOs will say, yeah, let's report out to our investors how we're doing on various ESG goals. So I'm actually optimistic, and I could be totally wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. Thank you for sharing your views. Whenever I sense, this is a human rights lens, not a de&i lens. Whenever I sense resistance, I get really excited. And so to hear you say, and I agree, that there are a lot of corporate actors out there who are resisting this work, who think there will be mission creep. I agree with them. The likelihood of this growing outside of the environment is highly likely. Ironically, pushing these metrics along an environmental trajectory is far more doable and less politically sensitive than promoting gender equity or racial equity or right? And so it's become in some way the low-hanging fruit to provide metrics and oversight on the environment. And that is by design. Human rights workers for decades have been trying to find a way in to lead change holistically. And proximity to wrongdoing, and that's the term human rights workers use with corporations, proximity to wrongdoing fits really well with environmental concerns or supply chain concerns. So it likely will grow if there is a Democrat in the White House. And I'm not a partisan. I'm an independent, not a big fan of either party.
Right.
But it's clear that the move to promote Gary Gensler, who heads the SEC. Gary Gensler has a very keen eye on ESG. The majority of the board supports ESG on the SEC. That could all go away in 2 years. So everything I'm saying to you right now could all be done away with and unwound in 2 years, because to Brad's point, many corporate leaders view this as an impingement, an infringement on capitalism, and I suspect a Republican-led administration would probably support that outlook. The one element that could potentially shift that thinking is my last point here, that there is a change in generational priorities, particularly in the global north. And so I'll just peg a number. If you're like under 30 or 35, more and more your consumption and your purchasing dollars are connected to values. More and more consumers, citizens who are younger, they want to see value-based products and experiences. So those companies, those for-profit and nonprofit organizations who can center this work, their revenues are going to go up. Like, that's the part of the market I do like, is making that business case that if you want to grow revenue, use these tools. I really don't care what motivates you to do the work. If it's money, I'll take it. If it's service, I'll take that too. I don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so if I can motivate corporations, I'm thinking of like Unilever or Williams-Sonoma that have onboarded some of these things, that can help move the needle. And I really don't care if they are disingenuous or not, or purely looking at the bottom line, because the bottom line supports equity. And the more you promote human rights and equity in your organization, the more money you're going to make. We've known this for 12 years now. 10 to 12%, you will grow your revenues. And so the SEC understands that ESG investments have increased exponentially since 2016 when they started tracking these things. It's clear there is a market for this work. It's clear that consumers and citizens and people participating in the market, they also want these things. And so around 2021, 2022, the SEC onboarded ESG for its annual examination priorities. That's a first. That's a big deal. It's going to be very difficult to unwind that. So the SEC is saying it is a priority for us to examine how well organizations are committed to economic equity. How well are companies organizing themselves to promote internally and externally equity and human rights. And they're also providing oversight, and they're observing how well do corporations and other companies and organizations provide transparent processes for DE&I metrics, for instance, not just saying they're going to do a thing, but actually reporting on it. Now, there's no teeth to these examination priorities. The SEC cannot just like hammer you because your equity governance got like a 2 out of a 10. That could be coming, but we don't have that yet. Back to Brad's point, we actually don't have, we have the carrot, we don't have the stick yet within the SEC, because it is new. That's part of the idea, and less about the codification. Oh.
So just to clarify with you, Aaron, so when if they examine those priorities, it's not like they are providing transparent information about rating these companies based on those priorities. Like, these information, we can just go and see, okay, how are they meeting, SEC?
Yeah, that's a really good one, Donna. The SEC is not providing a lot of transparency on its assessments of companies and organizations. For that, you got to drill a little deeper, do a little bit more work to get into like shareholder meetings and to see how the examination priorities are trickling down to the shareholders. That's where you can start to gain insight into like, how do the SEC assess? You could do a freedom of information request. This is not sensitive information. So you can FOIA the SEC's examination of Unilever. You could FOIA that. But is the SEC putting up on their site the results of the examination priorities? Not yet. Not yet. Hopefully it's coming, but this is still new in the SEC system. The ideas are not new, so that's not quite there yet either.
Okay.
So I'll go through each bucket, the economic, social, and governance, and sort of tease out how the SEC is viewing this. And again, these metrics are tied back to the UN's SDGs, the Strategic Development Goals. And for someone who supports the UN system with all of its flaws, I, for one, am appreciative that we are starting to attempt to integrate international consensus within some federal institutions. That has not happened before. So on the economic side of equity, the SEC, one of its examination priorities is, does the organization, does the corporation promote equal and fair employment and pay practices for everyone? This is pay equity, this is the wage gap, pay transparency, which I know some of you are really keen on. Is there increased representation and training in management and supervisory positions by people of difference? It's not enough to hire, right? It's not even enough to retain talent of difference. Is the company committed to attracting, recruiting, retraining, and growing and developing talent of difference so that these folks have opportunities to move up the ladder and become C-suite folks, decision makers, and not just cogs, not just boxes to be checked on people's diversity reports? This last element, it's a shocking examination priority for a federal organization to concern itself with. The SEC is starting to assess and examine to what extent does the corporation or the company or the nonprofit improve the quality of life for people of difference. It's an amazing thing to have the SEC be concerned about housing, transportation, school, recreation, and health. All of these have key economic drivers to them. All of them have sub-markets associated with them. Just think about housing. As some of you work in houselessness, imagine if organizations were actually held to a standard of providing a living wage to ensure that its employees are not chronically houseless, which is a common phenomena for hourly wage workers, right? That they live on the margins of poverty and they're working 1, 2, 3 jobs, still cannot have stable housing. The SEC sees that as an economic inequity, just like the UN does. There's a few dozen more under each of these categories. I was just pulling out what I thought were the more interesting elements to give you a broad sense of how the SEC and the UN views ESG. So that's how the SEC views economic equity: employment, representation, quality of life. The social element, which some believe contains de&i, I don't see it locked in that silo. I see equity across the ESG spectrum, but many folks, especially in North America, they focus on the S, and the S is where you really see human rights and equity. And so the SEC will begin to examine to what extent does GE promote goals that are aligned with local, regional, national communities of difference priorities. That's huge. That gets to like risk assessments, community engagement. You don't see a lot of corporations who are doing this. You see a lot of B corporations who are doing this, right? To ensure that what they're doing and the services they provide actually respond to community needs to some extent and give the community voice and choice into how those products and services are delivered. Related, the SEC is really curious about to what extent does the company or the corporation include community stakeholders, looking at peers, looking at potential partners to do this work with. Williams-Sonoma has low-key been doing this across the globe. They were one of the worst corporate actors out there, and they started to get dinged by organizations who look at business and human rights. Now Williams-Sonoma, wherever they go around the world, Palestine was one of the first places they were able to do this work, connecting with local communities to see what they actually need. Can Williams-Sonoma provide value to the community, as well as make its products and make a healthy profit? The SEC is curious to what extent are corporations developing, implementing de&i risk assessments or climate surveys, if you will. SEC calls them social audits, which is what most of the world calls them. So auditing an organization or corporation's de&i climate, and then providing mitigation strategies. So it's not just does the corporation assess itself and report on itself, but what are the strategies to mitigate against inequities? Southwest Airlines is one of the leaders in carriers on doing internal assessments on implementing de&i risk assessments and then implementing mitigation strategies. Airlines, I don't know why, but airlines are really intrigued by this work. I haven't gotten into why. Maybe some of you have a notion, perhaps because most airlines are global and they can sense the unfair competitive advantage they might have if they start to adopt some of these elements. And lastly, the SEC is examining to what extent is a corporation or a nonprofit, their policies impact those local and regional asks and priorities. Is the corporation a good social actor? Are they part of the solution, or are they part of the problem? Or are they ambivalent, which I would put in the category of a problem? Those of you who know me know that I cannot stand ambivalence. Pick a side, and I'm with you, even if it's against this work. It's the ambivalence that I think we need to be wary of. So again, I invite the resistance, because that means values. There are stories behind that resistance that I want to hold. The last category is on governance. Now, governance means governance within the organization itself, like what is the corporate governance structure of IBM? But it also means how does that governance structure relate to the government, capital G, the state, the country? So toggle between internal government structure and external government structures. And so does the corporation work to decrease or marginalize laws, customs, and practices that impede this work? That's straight from corporate social responsibility, CSR, which started around in the 90s in North America. So if you are a corporate actor, you have a lot of influence locally, regionally, globally, particularly if you're a transnational corporation. So you actually, a transnational corporate actor has some influence on that local, regional, national government. They can actually leverage their dollars. They can leverage their work to help promote equity by decreasing barriers, whether it be laws against like gendered employment, laws that allow adolescents to work, laws around transparency, how do you report harassment, etc. More and more corporations are being asked to be part of the solution and not to perpetuate local oppressive laws that marginalize equity. And so one of the challenges we see on this one are corporations that work in China, let's say. And so to do business in China, your corporate governance structure is expected to bend and to flex towards the state of China. And so it's really difficult for a corporate actor working in China to work to eliminate oppressive laws. You basically sign an agreement that says you're not going to do that. But again, that shows that there are countries out there like China, like Iran, like India, who are very sensitive to public exposure on these things. They're so sensitive that they're like, you need to sign these non-disclosure agreements. You need to commit to not challenging us, because they know full well that the market forces are very powerful forces.
Here in the US, just as a reality check, I guess, of how far we have to go to even start to address things that are on this chart in governance. The idea that a state could mandate that a publicly traded corporation must have at least one woman on their board of directors. There's one state, and that's California. And all of the other 49 are like, oh my God, get out of my business. State doesn't have any standing for something as like what? This is 2023. So I'm not trying in any way, Aaron, to undermine the thrust of your presentation, but there's just it's going to be a long road. All of us.
Oh, you're not undermining it. You're bolstering it.
All right, good. I was hoping to.
No, that bolsters it. This is not easy. It's a heavy lift. I'm not suggesting it's all happening. No, not at all.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting that there are structures and scaffolds in place now to do this work. But no, it's being done quite unevenly. And as you said earlier, Brad, a lot of corporate actors, they're allergic to this stuff. But it's not going away. It's not going, even if there is a change in administration, a lot of this work is going to continue. This is where things are trending slowly.
Yes.
Very slowly.
Well, if once the framework is established in law and it's been challenged at the Supreme Court, and we all realize that it's not the end of America, things could actually change very rapidly, hanging on this framework, is my view. Who knows?
And this is where the value add, the accelerant can come from global civil society, nonprofits. It can come from B corporations. It can come from lifestyle businesses, mission-driven organizations. I think there's enough allies and co-conspirators in the global north to push this. I believe top down, bottom up, middle out.
Yeah.
So I'm giving you a very top-down view of elite SEC federal power driving it down. But there's also bottom up. And apparently California sounds like a middle out, where they actually have adopted some governance models. A lot of boards are adopting some of these elements in their structures. I think board governance, Rashard heard me say this many times, board governance is one of the hottest, sexiest multiplier effects for equity in North America. It's also one of the whitest, most affluent locations in America, in North America. So there's great work that can be done within boards, within committees, regents, and commissions. And another examination priority, I'm really interested in like uncovering the opportunity gaps between your goals and the reality. And so a corporate actor, and most corporations now have a DE&I statement. Most corporate actors have a chief diversity officer, right? Like it's become kind of all the rage these days. I'll speak more on that towards the end. But it's very easy to perform equity in the global north. But what is the actual reality of those structures? And the SEC is starting to examine what you say you're doing and what you actually do. And of course, governance, good governance is transparent governance, whether it's in your company or in the state or a nation. And so is the corporation committed to doing its due diligence, evaluating how well they're moving the needle on these priorities, providing training and coaching, supporting more equitable processes to align with what they say they're doing. You see this in Hollywood. So more and more, you're starting to see equity. These issues of equity governance are in the major motion picture studios now. And so now they do provide the Motion Picture Association. It's no longer the Motion Picture Association of America. It's the MPA. It's a global corporation. The MPA is now pushing the due diligence across all major and minor studios. So Netflix is on board. They release annual governance reports on equity. Paramount, Universal, they also promote very transparent annual reports on what they say they're going to do and what they're actually doing. It's quite surprising to me to see that in the entertainment, sports, and leisure. It's great. It's really neat to see.
Don't feel surprised. I feel this is the most consumed, I think globally, the most consumed market, and it's accessible to a lot of people. So I wonder just about, going back to like, why is that important? It's one that is consumed globally in media and those digital information. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Donna. I also know the MPA shifted its entire leadership structure, and now it's mostly State Department human rights refugees who run the MPA. They're no longer from the entertainment industry. They're no longer insiders. The entire C-suite are former human rights activists. And I think those folks brought a lot of energy to the MPA to drive these changes, which were held back for years until, Hollywood decided that this particular man of color, George Floyd's death, matters. And now you see a raft of programs and hundreds of billions of dollars that the entertainment industry is plowing into equity and governance under this model. So that's where ESG comes from. There's a context that predates it around the UN. ESG categories and how the SEC actually looks at it and examines it for each of those baskets, including all the challenges therein. And I just want to end my presentation with just sort of 4 takes from where I sit about this entire project. 2 positive, 2 not so positive. So I think it is a great look to couple equity with businesses. And when that equity when that de&i or that ESG is based not off of a region like North America, which does replicate oppression, but actually has a global consensus. These metrics, like them or loathe them, have a global consensus. And it's taken, from like 1947 until 1998 to do that outreach, to build that consensus, to have the metrics ready to be voted upon. So I think it's a net positive, no matter where this goes, to couple US business approaches to equity with a global human rights perspective. And in that way, it's less like chasing headlines and more about transformational change. We're gonna see less regional takes and perhaps more of a global consensus on how to push these ideas. So I think it's wonderful that this phenomena is finally emerging. We finally see nearly a century of work on business and human rights coming to the fore. I think it's very exciting for human rights and equity workers. I've already experienced this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon, thinking about markets and equity sparks creativity. It gets the mind going. It also brings up challenges, like, can we actually address equity through economic means? And when we start to look at the SEC's priorities, you can notice that, oh my gosh, US federal power is adopting international best practices, finally, to promote human rights and equity. That is what the US government asks of other nations annually in its US Human Rights Report, but we've never really taken it on ourselves. We're great at promoting human rights and DE&I through rhetoric and some actions. We're not so great here in North America about taking those lessons and embedding them back home, right? Reminds me of myself, it's much easier for me to give advice than to take it. So I think there's a lot of creative thinking, a lot of dynamism around these issues that we shouldn't let go of. It also like intersects and fertilizes a lot of other sectors like the nonprofit sector, B corporations, even how individuals decide to invest, right? Values investing, ESG investing. It's giving potential investors another lens through which they can see economic viability and see that you could actually generate revenue by being equitable. It's not a losing proposition. It's a gaining proposition for organizations. So those are very positive developments, and they're not something just to be dismissed, because it is a new thing that's hitting our shores here in North America. And I for one, hope it continues, that we couple the local with the global when it comes to human rights and equity. Now, these last two elements, I think they start to tease out some of the things we've been talking about. If we're not very careful, we're going to see what happened with environmentalism happen to human rights and equity. And so if we're not careful, we're going to see performativeness again, box checking. Because again, the frame is risk mitigation, not social justice, not reconciliation, not transformation, not conflict resolution, but risk mitigation. And so in my experience, when folks and organizations solely look at these issues through the lens of risk mitigation, we're going to get performativeness, box checking, and like brand boosting. Look at us, look at all these wonderful things we're doing. But are you actually transforming your organization? Are you actually joining hand in hand with indigenous and local communities to change the environment? Are you actually pushing on governance structures? Or are you just saying a thing to stop you from being sued or being canceled or being, accused of not being woke? So it can become, some people call it equity capitalism. Personally, I'd rather have this concern than not. I would much rather have to guard against these from happening than not having it at all. Again, when it comes to human rights, I don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I know full well there's going to be corporate actors out there who are going to equity wash. They're going to perform it and convince you that they're great social corporate actors. And because there's not a lot of legislation, there's not a lot of teeth, there's no sticks, they can get away with it. Hopefully that trend will change as these policies continue. Lastly, and perhaps this brings us back to the beginning and Rashar's comment and question. And I hope this elicits some conversation, discussion, or even pushback. My belief is inequity is not an economic issue, and the market has a part to play. I don't think it's a holistic view to translate inequity into pure dollars and cents and economic viability. It's something I believe very deeply, and that is my bias. I'm a social scientist by training. I'm very wary of reducing the human experience to zeros and ones and dollars and cents. I am solidly middle class. I was raised in poverty, and I am solidly middle class. I have my advanced degrees. I have my lovely little home. I have my nice clothes, and I know damn well that my economic success will not protect me from inequity. Like that's a very simple way to view it, but that's how I hold it. So there's something else going on. And so if I only view inequity through the lens of economics and capitalism, I'm losing that intersectionalism that so many equity workers talk about. Like, I'm not just a consumer. I'm not just a citizen who lives in a capitalist economy. You know, I'm mixed race, I'm cisgendered male, I'm a veteran, I'm a father. There are all these elements that should be taken into consideration to address inequity, not just economic well-being. That said, I do believe economics has a productive, positive role to play in promoting human rights and equity. I think you can use the market to incentivize corporate actors to do better. Unfortunately, social justice arguments, facts, reciting a history of oppression does not change the attitude of most corporate actors, but the wallet does. And again, if that's what motivates a corporate actor to get off the stick, I'm here for it. I just don't want us to create a situation where we only look at dollars and cents, because oppression will be, all right, you want dollars and cents? Here's your reparations check. I don't want to hear from you ever again. And if oppression was smart, if white supremacism was really smart, they start cutting those checks. They'd give me my 40 acres and a mule, and they'd say, don't ever talk to me again about it. That's a fear that I have, is once we see that people are lifted out of economic poverty, we're like, oh, everything's cool, done and dusted. Not so, not so at all. But I do believe the market can be a positive force, but it can't do it alone. And I do not want human rights and equity to be dominated by capitalism. I don't think that is a great way to promote sustainable human rights and equity. That's a great way to promote risk mitigation. It's a great way to promote compliance. But if we really want to transform behaviors, we got to move beyond risk mitigation and compliance. And I think the market has a hard time doing that, has a hard time promoting more like human-centric views, what Europeans call human security. And so a human security paradigm, which we do not have in North America, it does include economic and the markets as one piece of the puzzle for promoting true human security. So I'm glad we have it. I'm excited that there's energy behind it. It's insufficient to truly promote human rights and equity. And if you live in the global north, I don't know if we can get there without having these elements. The global south, that would be an entirely different presentation, I think. But in terms of like where major markets are located, where capital is located, where economic power is located, it's clear to me that right now in 2023, it's in the global north. So that's why I tend to focus on the global north, because that's where the systemic oppression really lies. And that's also where there's tremendous energy and potential around it. So what? Like, one of my mentors would always ask me after a thesis or a presentation, so what? Like, why should I care? And if you can't answer the so what problem, you kind of wasted people's time. And so what? Like, why care about this other than those of us who believe it's the right thing to do? So what? So what? We should care as citizens, as corporate participants, as nonprofit folks, entrepreneurs, B Corp advisors, that out there in the world, there's a scaffolded system that's been pressure tested for international human rights and equity standards. You don't need to make it up. You don't need to wait for the book or the person to tell you what they are. We've had them for over 20 years. And they're global and they work globally. North American de&i, which tends to be hyper-focused on race, that doesn't travel well. This travels very well. And so what? Why should we care? We should care because we all want standards. We're all looking for the answer. Well, the answer is within those SDGs that Jennifer loves to observe and analyze so much. It's what a lot of international observers look at. They're there for you, and you can ground them, distill them, and translate them for your individual lives, your family and community life, and your professional life. This work allows you to begin to integrate ESG and equity into your plan. If you or your organization has a DE&I plan and you're at loose ends, like, how do I actually make this work in a way that does not seem performative, that does not seem to be about responding to cancel culture, but is an organic evolution of the organization? ESG and the SEC allows you a dispassionate way, a market-based way, divorced from emotion, to integrate it into your DE&I plan. And if you don't have a DE&I plan within your organization, you can start here and seeing, like, what does the globe suggest are the standards? A third thing, something I'm really keen on, is when you look at ESG, when you look at this work, it allows you to use these building blocks in a way to move beyond compliance, right? In the economic sphere, transforming quality of life is an interest, improving health, improving employment, recreation, housing. This is how you can actually start to shift cultures and behaviors, not in the performative, be woke or get canceled. That's compliance, that's risk mitigation. That's not going to transform behaviors or organizations. But these elements that the SEC is beginning to examine, it does give you some interesting starting places to help transform out of compliance, take that next level. And finally, if you do this work, you're going to be more attractive to more and more individuals, especially when we talk about the generational shift, right? And if you want to grow market share, increase your revenues, increase your reach, if you adopt these practices, you will grow your business. And that's just not me. The RAND Corporation has done studies and proven this globally. McKinsey has done studies and proven this for North America. We can no longer debate whether implementing ESG or equity is going to hurt or help your business. It's going to help your business. You will make more money if you do these things, which is interesting because a lot of capitalists, to Brad's point, they're not doing it. Isn't it interesting? Like, I thought capitalists want to make that money. You want to make that money, implement ESG and equity. And watch revenues grow, watch retention grow, watch morale grow as you onboard these elements. And it will give you an unfair competitive advantage. You will stand out. And you either get ahead of that curve or you get swallowed by it. But it is happening because citizens globally demand it to be so, especially younger global citizens. And I don't think they're gonna be changing anytime soon. Yeah, the Nielsen study also demonstrates that. Thank you, Kim. That's great. Well, thank you, everyone, in particular for the questions, the comments, the engagement. We can have a free-ranging conversation as we wind down. That was a lot, I know. I didn't see anyone snacking or eating their lunch, so feel free to have a nibble.
Can I jump in with so what that we're thinking about a lot these days? And maybe this is the part 2 that several on this call have called out, but we believe that as these changes roll out, most corporations will need intermediary nonprofits in strategic partnerships that can help them make sense of what to do.
Ooh, yeah. You're speaking my language. Something I noticed working overseas is how unusual North American civil society is with
Absolutely.
it's
How
so
clueless.
unusual, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of nonprofits can be a little allergic to working with the for-profit sector. I think that's systemic oppression, Rashar, creating a dichotomy where it's us against them. And it's the nonprofit social justice warriors versus the grown-up capitalists. And I'm not here for that at all. I think we can learn from one another. And I absolutely believe that civil society actors have a huge role to play here. It's a way to grow your nonprofit. It's a way to expand your reach and influence as well. I know a lot of nonprofits struggle with revenue, struggle with impact and reach. Imagine, if you will, a local nonprofit joining forces with a corporate actor to help each other realize these things. It would be tremendous. Yeah, I completely agree. And there's a big culture in North America that says, like, do not do that, firewall.
Yeah. There is an example that's working currently in the US, probably not very well, but banks do have community reinvestment requirements. They must do pro-social things in their communities, like getting microloans to BIPOC farmers.
Right.
And making sure that mortgages are originated in a proportional manner to the population. In other words, Black and brown mortgage applicants get accepted at the same rate, all other factors being equal, than white mortgage applicants get, which is not the case, of course.
Also, Brad, like Wells Fargo is investing in the private prison system very long time. So I feel like, like Aaron, sorry, Brad, I don't want to cut you off. It was just a thought. Finish, and then I have
No, I mean, it's just an example, so it's not coming from Mars. The financial sector does have these requirements. I think it's you introduced the word greenwashing. I think it's mainly still ESG washing, but there are examples where progress is being made that I would regard as authentic.
Yeah. To Donna's point, and I see your hand, Rashar, I think about this. Do I want to be right or do I want to win? And I want to win. And the wins look different when I'm not trying to be right. And so working with a corporation that does some bad shit, that's not right, but I can win with them. That's my belief. And if I'm looking for the perfect actor out there, I'm never going to find them. Donna.
Well, I mean, thank you, Aaron. This has been really interesting. A lot of new information I didn't know about. And the things that I'm thinking about might not be, I guess my mind is always going to international conflict resolution and things like that, right? Like I'm thinking, for example, during the war on Iraq, and like thinking about Blackwater, right? It's like privately hired, and thinking about if those things were in place, then what would have that meant for, right? And how, like thinking about how would that improve peace, I guess. Another example I'm thinking about is the story about and I'm happy to share it, the story about the Royal Museum for Central Africa and Belgium, and how they put a lot of money to decolonize the museum and really bring in Congolese to like rewrite that history that has been being told through the museum, right? And like how that required a lot of kind of like really putting money where it matters to renovate that whole project and retell the story, and how that would advance. You talked about reparations, but I think this is, to me, is not a reparative move. It's a move that takes into consideration some of those like larger mechanisms that were created. And really, when they are applied, they can really move the needle on peace building in societies.
Right.
So yeah, so
Thank you for that. Blackwater is a great example, and it shows like we can have these policies. There could be ad hoc wins that Brad's highlighting, but until we have a full scaffolding, which means incentives and consequences, it's gonna be really hard to transform people because it becomes opt-in, right? It's like if you want to do it, you can do it. We end up preaching to the choir. I think that if we actually did have this type of scaffolding in place, if we had legislation with some teeth behind it, bad actors like Blackwater would have a hard time raising the capital necessary to oppress people and kill people. I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I do believe that Blackwater, or Z, I think it's called now, or maybe the Blackwater, they're able to operate with impunity because we don't have any legislative structures to get at them with. We just try to name and shame them, and that doesn't work. You can't name and shame people into good behaviors. It actually just reinforces the bad behavior. Thank you, Donna. Rashar.
Yeah, I think, a major part of it too is like, how do we get folks to value-centered choices in their economic piece, right? And so even if you have corporate community investment, a lot of times what end up happening is you have gatekeepers of that investment so how it's actually applied in the community is inequitable. Even if the intent initially was, it doesn't end up that way because oppression is one of those pieces that it's so embedded in the society that it's being applied both from the top and the bottom, because people are seeing that there's this benefit in behaving like a bad actor because see the benefits that they've gotten. So they adopt these same values. And now we're only looking in one place for value shift when should be looking all over the entire fabric of it and incentivizing value shift until it becomes more of the mainstay. But you have to create some incentive, and either that's through penalty or reward, but in order to get folks to see that there's actually value in behaving appropriately.
Right. Otherwise, it'll lead to equity washing and box checking and performativeness, which I would say that's where much of the global north is today, is a performative compliance risk mitigation paradigm, which sounds good, it looks good, and it does very little to transform either behaviors or the reality on the ground. But if that's where we're starting, I accept that. Sometimes I sense like that's the beginning and the end for many corporate actors because there are no incentives they don't believe the incentives, which are myriad, and there are very few disincentives outside right now. Like the purchaser has most of the power. That's why these generational shifts are so cool to watch. And as someone who's like pushing 50, it's so satisfying and gratifying to see younger folks across the globe just like demand better. And they're voting with their dollars. And I would like to believe that that will have a difference. That will actually influence the way corporate actors behave in the long run.
Aaron, I just want
like what,
Go
sorry.
ahead, Donna.
It's kind of like I feel what happened in oh my God, sorry, I'm blanking. But like, with boycott, divestment.
BDS?
Yeah, but not just BDS in terms of like Israel, Palestine. I mean, I feel even when it started in, gosh, why am I blanking? Where's Mandela?
South Africa.
South Africa.
Right.
Like I think in South Africa that happened as well, and when they were they led BDS campaign, and thinking about like how that, as you said, like the purchaser is starting to really put that kind of like backing behind their value system and what that means for changing strategies, because now the market has to follow, right? Because they're losing profit.
Thank you for bringing in BDS, which is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. BDS is an economic outcome of these elements. And like it or not, like it was part of a very successful strategy to end apartheid in South Africa. They also used it in Northern Ireland, England during the Troubles. There are economic arguments made for peace. The Balkan Peace Plan, that one of the biggest wins the US has ever gotten, I'd argue, in the modern world, is the peace, the Good Friday Accords we were able to secure, and how we resolved the Balkan War. That war had the ending of it had tremendous economic equity elements to it. So yeah, BDS is fascinating. It's an absolutely fascinating tool to advance equity through economics. Yeah, and it worked. It worked.
Aaron, I just want to express so much gratitude for you pulling together this presentation. What an incredible job you did in explaining some pretty globally complicated things in a way that makes them feel very clear and hopeful in a lot of ways too. As we're talking about networks, I want to make sure I give you a chance to talk about both how people in this room can further learn from your expertise. I know there was already a call for round 2, and while that's an exciting idea, I also want to say that Aaron is running a business and is a resource. So first of all, how can people in this room who are excited to continue working with you, how can they do so? And then also, what should all of us be thinking about with regards to the nonprofits and organizations that we work alongside? Which ones can we direct to you to further their work?
Gosh, those are wonderful big asks. Thank you, Jennifer. This has been my pleasure, first of all. And I'm just really glad to be able to be in the room with you. My contact info, excuse me, I also learned I should not eat nuts during a presentation. Probably not a good look. My contact information is in the chat and on the screen. You can email me at aaron@anthropolicy-consulting.org. I'm based in Portland. I love working with nonprofits, especially mission-driven nonprofits. I've worked in the past with like Mercy Corps, for those of you who are aware of that great humanitarian organization, and a few others in Portland. Increasingly, through my work with Rashard and Path with Art, I have been really excited to work more with leisure, arts-based organizations, sports organizations, because I think the arts and entertainment and leisure, like so many folks just kind of get it in those spaces. And I find that the bar is much lower to like convince people to do this work. And I also work with families, a lot of this work, it skips the family. It goes right to the business, right to the profession, to the nonprofit. That's cool. I also believe that behavior changes start in your homes and with your families and communities. So I actually do work with individuals and families on this work as well. So if that's something you're interested in, please hit me up. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, I want to say, as we're wrapping up here, this session has been recorded. We find it to be an incredibly important conversation that we want to share more broadly, specifically through our YouTube channel and our social media. If anyone on this call has any concerns about that recording or questions, please feel free to let me know. We're happy to make edits so that you're not included if that's important to you. I'm Jennifer at globalpdx.org if you have any concerns whatsoever. I also want to do a plug for 2 of our upcoming events. One is a networking event that comes up on this month on the 11th. It's called Development Drinks. We do it every single month. It's a chance to network with people who care about what's happening in the world and who are actually doing the work to make global change happen. The second is our Spring Mixer. It's going to be a much bigger event from 2 to 6 on June 13th. There's going to be a lot of presentations like what Aaron has done. Probably not as great because this was phenomenal, but still really wonderful. They're going to be called lightning presentations, 3 minutes from a broad spectrum of people doing global work, just so you can get a snapshot of what's happening here in Oregon. And then, of course, some more networking to build your communities out. We would love to see all of you there. Please let me know if you ever have any questions about GlobalPDX. Again, a big, big shout of gratitude to Aaron and to all of you for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for taking part of your day. Hang out. The sun's shining now. Go have lunch.
Go enjoy
Yeah.
it. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks,
Hope
everyone.
to see you at an event soon.